folks. It's been a while, and we have a very special event today. Today with us, I have Michael Muller of the band Balmorhea, which started in 2006. Michael is one of the founding guitarists. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about Music Matter Jazz, which Michael has been a fan of. Along with us is Jeremy Elkin, who is an independent filmmaker. He's been doing some wonderful independent films. He's been working with Vanity Fair magazine. More recently, he did a documentary which combines the hip hop and skateboarding culture in New York City from 1987 to 1997. And Jeremy, what is the name of the documentary?
All the Streets Are Silent.
All the Streets Are Silent. He's also a big Music Matters jazz fan, and he's just recently been getting into it. But today, specifically, we have two of the founders, Kevin Gray and Joe Harley, and we kind of want to have them talk about their experience in the founding of Music Matters Jazz. So to kick things off, Joe, for those that are really not familiar with Music Matters Jazz, can you really talk about what was the drivers behind it? What were some of the influences? Because there really wasn't anyone doing audiophile jazz reissues per se, with the exception of Classic Records. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit. If Classic Records was an influence, was Rudy Van Gelder's CD reissues an influence on that? Can you speak to that?
Rudy Van Gelder's CD reissues,
yeah,
they might have been a negative influence because they had definitely a mixed reception. And I, like a lot of other people, I got some of those when they came out. But the results weren't, there was a compression layered onto compression. And so that series wasn't received really well. And I didn't particularly care for them either, to be honest. Nothing against Rudy, don't get me wrong, but just the approach they took sonically. I played a few of those and put them away and stuck with the originals I have, because I have tons of original Blue Note pressings. But as far as the founding, Ron Rombach, who owns Music Matters and was highly involved in the rare record market for some years, and he that name Music Matters was the name of his company, and we just carried on with it. But we started to talk about doing a reissue series focused on Blue Note in late 2005 or early 2006. And I had known Michael Cascuna, who, of course, is one of the key figures in the history of Blue Note. Had helped him a bit in the past with some of the Mosaic reissues. And so I contacted him. I thought, the chances of successfully doing this, two guys that Capitol, EMI at that time, EMI owned Capitol, Universal owns it now, Universal Music. But I thought the chances of two relatively unknowns successfully getting a licensing deal were dim, unless we had someone like Michael Cascuna in our corner. And so we started talking to him. And initially, we thought our goal was, early on, we thought, hey, what if we got Rudy to do these? And it was Michael, I think, that told me, if you've ever talked to him, the sound of his voice. He's like, yeah, Harley, I don't think that's going to happen. And Rudy wasn't even using his lathe. I didn't know that at the time, but he wasn't cutting records.
He went digital and never looked back.
That's right. He wasn't interested in vinyl. but we thought that we would try to the best of our ability, make them sound like the originals. That's all we knew. And we went in with that sort of an attitude. And I'll never forget the first two titles we did. We did a Horace Parlin album called Speaking My Piece, which to this day is one of my favorites, maybe because it was the first, and an Art Blakey record called The Big Beat. And we put those masters up, and I looked at Ron, and he looked at me, and we knew we'd never heard anything on our originals that sounded like those masters, that the masters were bigger and more dynamic. And we were hearing things we'd never heard before, records we thought we knew stem to stern, front to back, knew them in every way. And we put up the master tape, and it's like, oh my God, listen to that. So our goal changed on the spot. And we talked to Kevin. Kevin hears masters all the time, but we didn't. And so we said, God, if we could get this, that would be amazing. If we could get what we're hearing on these tapes onto lacquer, that would be very exciting. And so the goal changed on the spot. And
so what was your connection to Kevin specifically? Why did you go to Kevin and Acoustic? I'm curious that background story. Say again?
Because he's the best.
There's no denying that for sure.
We had been working together going back to about 1997.
Okay.
Yeah, we had done, I ran the AudioQuest music label for the entire time it was around. And then I had been doing some projects for Chad Kassem. And I believe the first thing we did together, Kevin, was one of those records, one of the blues records.
Right. I don't remember which one, but there were a few.
Might have been
Jimmy D. Lane, maybe.
Maybe, yeah, you might be right. It was either that or Hubert Sumlin.
Right, yeah, that was about the same time.
But we hit it off right away. Like the way Kevin hears the music and the way I hear it, and this, his monitors. I say this all the time. My system is quite different. I'm looking over here because my rig's over here. But the way he's got his rig voiced is almost identical to what I get here. And so, from a mastering standpoint, if you're the producer, that makes you feel really comfortable because you're wearing the same pair of glasses, sonic glasses. And so I recognize that from those first sessions. I worked with a lot of different mastering engineers, but I remember very specifically thinking I feel right at home working with Kevin.
And those first titles that you did were sort of, you were just going off of, your music, your history with the originals, right? And you started picking titles that you felt, sonically sounded at a certain level. Or was it like, did you start year by year the list, sort of like you do with the Tone Poet now, or was it more loose?
It was pretty organic. I'm a chronic list maker anyway. And so I had lists of Blue Notes for years before that, just my favorites. And I'm always making lists. But as it became more evident that we were going to get this deal, then it really got serious. So Ron and I, every night we would be, what are you listening to? Listening to these 2 or 3. What are you listening to? Well, I'm going to listen, and we would compare notes and make our first list of what we were going to submit to license.
And you're talking about playing the tape or the original or both?
I'm not sure.
You were listening.
We wouldn't get the tapes until they were licensed.
Yeah. They don't send you the tapes
Starting with
just to check
original.
them out. No.
Okay.
No.
That must have been very difficult to decide what titles you wanted to go for first.
Oh God, yeah. When you're first starting, oh wow.
It was. There's so many great titles that I never have looked at it like a closed system.
Okay.
To this day, I get questions like, why don't you've never done this one? What is it you have against this title? And I always say, nothing. I love this title. But you have to understand, you can't do them all at once. Right. The logistics just don't, you can't put out 100 records at one time.
Yeah, the two different series, I mean, you have like 900 or so classic, outstanding titles to choose from. I totally understand that.
It does seem like you were fairly intentional with balancing the spectrum of, if you're doing an organ one here, the next one's a trio, or the next one's a sextet with 3 tenor saxophonists. It seems like you sort of were thoughtful in the balance of the titles you.
Yes. Yeah, and that carries over to today. If I've got one that is particularly on the adventurous side, whether it's avant or whatever you want to call it, because I love all that stuff too, I'll pair it with something that's a little more down the middle, just so you don't, you may not relate to this one, but you're going to dig this one, or vice versa. We try to balance it.
I'm curious, Kevin, for you, in the mastering of these, do you feel like you had a sweet spot when you started getting in the flow of these? Like you could really know what to do it exactly immediately without thinking about it for a certain ensemble or a mixture of instrumentation, or is it kind of more of a broad general thing just coming off of Rudy's tape?
I'd say it's a little bit more by period, I mean, first you got the monos, then the transition to stereo, then the transition from Hackensack to Englewood Cliffs. And there were a lot of different things that happened in different eras with Rudy. But yeah, we've even a couple of years, let's say, into the Music Matters, we kind of knew what to expect when we put a tape up. There were very few big surprises, knowing what era it was recorded in, where, etc. Can
you talk about some of the challenges with a title? So let's say you do 10, you do 20, and then you hit one where either is it that there's cover art missing? Is it there's too much tone on the tape or something? Is there like a signal issue, or it just doesn't sound as like magical as you thought it was? Or like what are some of the issues you ran into early on with some of those tapes, or they wouldn't play?
Those were no, we've never had a problem with that. Well, maybe one or something, but yeah, those problems are very few and far between. I don't remember having any where we went, oh God, this is unusable sonically. That just didn't happen that I can recall. Now, Joe can speak to things where maybe there was missing session photos or that sort of thing. That's a different issue.
Well, so the Blue Note archive, including the tapes and the photos and the album art, has been, thankfully, or we wouldn't be here talking today, has been very, very carefully curated and maintained over the years. Even the tapes themselves, the way they come in, you've got Alfred's handwriting on them. There's a certain finished, finessed look to what they have, where I know for sure, Kevin, you can speak to this, but you get in other labels, Prestige and some of these, and you didn't have an Alfred. And
the writing is so sparse on a lot of those. Sometimes they don't even put the artist's name on the box.
Yeah.
Wow.
On Prestige titles, not uncommon.
Wow. Yeah, it's
maybe they couldn't decide who was supposed to be the leader. I don't know.
That's really quite different. But no, fortunately, all the tapes, all the artwork, the photos have been very secure and very carefully maintained over the years.
So those tapes are kept at Iron Mountain, is that correct? Or back in the day? And that,
Well, there's several Iron Mountains. So most of the Blue Note stuff is at Iron Mountain in Hollywood.
Hollywood, okay. So it can come to the studio at Acoustic or Coherent within a day.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, in the early days of Music Matters, you were at Acoustic, which is adjacent to RTI. So that was an easy drop into the tank.
Yeah.
As moving over to Coherent, would the lacquer be immediately shipped over or the following morning or something? How did that work?
We sent them first overnight. So, we cut them one day and then they get there at 8:30 the next morning.
Got it. That's nice.
And then the night before, I write to Doran Sauerbeer, who runs plating at RTI, and tell him, in the morning, you're going to get these 4.
Heads up.
And he knows, and then I copy everyone on the Blue Note team. And I do it. He knows what it means. It means, so get these in right now.
Right.
And he knows. He
Yeah.
knows.
And he's real good about it.
Yeah.
And so when you started Music Matters, you started with a 45.
Mm-hmm.
That went until, just for the record, it went till 2015, 16 in there when you switched to 33.
I think it was 2014.
2014.
As I recall.
Yeah, I don't recall the exact, it kind of runs together, but there was a point in time where, 45s were a big thing at that time. And there are some advantages to cutting at 45, but there's disadvantages. Now you're talking about 2 records instead of 1, and you're breaking up the original flow of the track order. So there's pluses, there's minuses, and after doing, I think 112, I think that's right.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, 112. Then we decided to do a few 33s, and then we were doing some of the titles that Chad had done on 45. We did at 33. We weren't going to do them again at 45 because what's the point?
And the Chad's Blue Note series, which Kevin was also cutting, overlapped with the Music Matters as well, right?
Yes.
We actually started first, and then I believe Chad started releasing 3 or 4 months later. Might have been a little longer than that, but it was a little bit later.
There's a separate license on the 45 versus the 33.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
So was there a time where there was some confusion about who got what license? And
yes.
Okay.
Do we want to talk? Probably don't need to talk about that.
If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine.
That's up to Joe.
Well, I think it was only on 1 title, as I recall.
Monin.
Yeah, and Leeway.
Oh, right.
Leeway. But mostly not. I mean, mostly we just chose different titles, different stuff.
Yeah. And it sounds like you, with your relationship with Chad already, I mean, hopefully that relationship still remained good. And
yeah. I was just doing both.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you went over to 33 1/3, was that more customer driven and more to pick up the titles that you couldn't do in 45?
I think at that point, we've been doing 45s for 4 or 5 years, and the aesthetic regarding 45s was beginning to shift a little bit.
Okay.
Where people were really excited about it, and that I include myself. I was too. But at a certain point, the getting up and down, not that most of us shouldn't get up and down more than we do.
It breaks the mood, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had a phone conversation with Ron I think back in 2014, and he made the comment that a lot of the customers were complaining about having to get up and flip sides. And honestly, I like the sonic clarity of the 45s.
Yeah,
Kevin,
I mean, they sound great.
Yeah.
Kevin, to someone who doesn't know about cutting and how that whole thing works, can you, in like layman's terms, can you describe the differences in cutting a 45 versus a 33 from a technical perspective?
Well, if you're talking about the sonic differences between the same thing cut at 33 and 45, it's all a matter of curvature, particularly on the inner grooves. You're not going to notice that big of a difference on the outside of the disc. But as you get towards the inside, you have more curvature at 33 and a third, because it's turning slower, I mean, it's going 33 and a third, but when you look at a constant angular velocity format, the wiggles are tighter together at 33 than they would be at 45, or kind of spread out at 45. And so there's a sonic advantage, but I wouldn't say it's huge.
Is there also an advantage to having more space on the physical?
Well, yeah, because you're cutting it down to like 8 or 10 minutes aside, even though 45 takes more space inherently than 33, with sides that short, you're finishing a little farther out too. So, yeah, there's that.
The other element in here, because I have 33s that we did that sound better than the 45 of the same title. And the reason for that is this other element Kevin can speak to, but his system changed.
It went through a significant change, around 2012.
Yep.
I basically completely rebuilt my console and put in a different tape machine, which my former business partner and I had built. And basically the electronics that I was putting in the new console was stuff that was taken out of my older console that was still owned by FutureDisc at the time that I started up at Acoustic. So I didn't have access to either the tape machine or those electronics, which included the equalizers. So the only thing that was really the same with my old system and the new system was the cutting electronics. But the console and the tape machine were different. And when I first moved, I bought the equipment back and it sat outside of the room in Acoustic because there wasn't enough room to put it in there. And so I never made an A/B comparison between the two. And no sooner did I move into Cohearent, I had room for the tape machine, and I took the console electronics, and basically it was all wired together with an umbilical. I wired it all together and hooked it up to the tape machine, and just kind of went, whoa. It sounded so much better than what I was used to hearing. It was shocking. So yeah, so that it took me almost a year and a half to get all of that interfaced into my new console, and that made a big change.
You were still amid the 45s only at that point, the 45 RPM?
Yeah, we were doing 45s only at that point. It was when Ron had me cut him an acetate at 33 because he wanted to see. And so I cut an acetate at 33 of something that he already had a 45 pressing on. And he said, man, the 33 blows the 45 away. He goes, I don't see why we're beating our head against the wall, putting out 2 record 45s when we can get this sound with 33. So.
Yeah, that's the other wrinkle in there, is that Kevin's system evolves substantially.
Right. And there was a further upgrade. We had put AudioQuest cables in up at Acoustic, but we upgraded to the newer ones, the Wild Blue and some of that at that time. And all of these things synergistically improved the system.
I was always curious who named all those AudioQuest cables. Joe, is that?
Bill Lowe.
Okay. I always got a kick out of those.
So Kevin, what year are you talking here? It's after 2013, 2014?
After 2012, yeah.
Got it.
So it might have actually been 2013 when we started the 30. I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on it too.
See, the other thing too is there was a big lead time between the time we mastered and the time that Music Matters stuff came out. So that makes it a little even more confusing trying to figure it out.
How far ahead? I know, Joe, you've said in interviews that you're about 1 to 2 years out for Tone Poets. Was it about
2.5?
Oh, it wasn't that long for the Music Matters, but it could have easily been 6 months to a year.
Yep.
Wow.
So I'm curious, were there any that you cut 33 and 45 at the same time?
Oh, well, they could listen to the Chad's 45s and then compare the ones we were doing at 33.
Ah, okay.
So, yeah.
Going back one step, in the early days when you got a 45, this was slipped inside the jacket, which is great. Tells the whole history of how it started, the impetus, stereo versus mono debate, the gram weight of the vinyl. And then you get to the next page, talks about the jacket, and there's a early list of the titles some were already out by this point. Right now there's 64 on here, and I've counted 5 or 6 that never made it. Some Benny Greens, some Lou Donaldsons, a couple of Lee Morgans, Jackie McLean. Can you talk about some of those titles? Those maybe were on your list and the tapes didn't work out, or
no. Honestly, it's a lot simpler than that. We would hear something and get excited and just arbitrarily make the change. And sometimes it had nothing to do with whether a title was worthy or not worthy, or we just, you'd hear something and go, oh man, you got to go play it. I just played it. You got to go play it. I'd forgotten. Ron would go, yeah, oh my God, it's great. Well, let's stick that one in. Okay. And who's going to stop us, right? So
it was a bit of a shuffle.
Yeah, it was really more like that. There wasn't some grand scheme. You mentioned Benny Green. That didn't come out there, but you might see it. It's
more trombone as a leader.
Yeah. It's didn't come out then, but it could very well come out soonish.
In the future. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think, Paul, you and I both have the Hobson's Grunman's cuts of the classic version of those, Soul Stirring and Back on the Scene. So that would be.
Yeah, I would be delighted to hear it done through Kevin. Because I think Bernie's approach was a little bit different from Kevin's. And so going back to it, Joe, I love the Instagram videos that you've been doing for the Tone Poets. And I know that you have an original there for reference.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what are you guys listening for in the original cut when you go to the new cut? Because you're not trying to duplicate what Rudy Van Gelder did. This is a new thing, but are you trying to extract some of what Rudy did originally?
Well, I mean, that master tape is what Rudy did originally. And True. So that's what we're going for. I mean, Rudy, one of the things he didn't like about LPs was, I think if he were alive now, hard to say, but if he was around and he saw what has happened with the development of turntables, cartridges, playback systems, that we can put the bass that's on the master tape. We can not use compression at all, which we don't. And, occasionally you run into someone with a turntable that's either not set up right or whatever.
Right.
But we don't cut to the lowest common denominator. We don't. We assume that the person who's, forked over $38 to buy it, has a decent and properly set up system. So, we don't have to think in terms of those compromises. Rudy did. He did. And you can see it in the cutting notes.
So listening to the original, is it more to see, hey, I can really improve it here and there? Because, yeah, like you said, they had to cater to the tables at the time.
They did.
It's just honestly, it's just a reference to see.
Yeah. Do we spend a lot of time? I mean, I do when choosing titles. I'm listening to those originals a ton. And I do, there's times I think, gosh, here we've got a B3 session, Babyface Willett session or Big John Patton or Jimmy Smith. And boy, there's not a lot of, bass on here. And, if you're listening to groove music and B3 driven music, if you don't hear the bass, that's kind of a big deal, and then you put those tapes up and there it is. It sounds like that person playing a B3 in front of you.
There's pedals.
There's pedals. And even though they're mostly playing with their left hand, but, but it's coming out of the bass, it's playing the bass. And so, we put that on because that's what he recorded. And I always look at it like if you saw these cats live, you would for sure hear the bass pedals of the B3, 100%. And, you have to take a perspective. So my perspective is I want it to be like those cats are in the room. I want to hear it like the guys are there playing for me. And I don't get so hung up on, I want it to sound like the old record I grew up with. Mm-hmm. That is fascinating to a lot of people. And I get that. There's two different aesthetics here.
And we understand both.
I understand both.
Yeah.
Not like one's right and one's wrong, but
no.
You have a point of view.
No. Mastering is an art. And personally, I like your aims and trying to get the most off of that master tape and get that onto the vinyl versus having to make compromises and dealing with some of the compression they had to deal with.
I have a question for both of you, Kevin and Joe. When those Music Matters first started coming out, what was the two-part question? What was the reaction from the people buying them, the fans, the music listeners? And then the second one, which is a little more interesting, is what was the reaction of the artists who are still alive and the estates of those artists? I heard a rumor of Freddie Hubbard coming into your studio to hear a record cut. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, people like Lou Donaldson or Wayne or these people that were alive, did those Music Matters get into their hands? Did they have any feedback?
Or Rudy as well.
Well, let me just set one thing straight there. I worked with Freddie Hubbard back in 1975 or 76 when I worked at Artisan Sound. That wasn't part of a Tone Poet or Blue Note session, actually.
Yeah. Freddie never came to a Music Matters or Tone Poet or Classic session.
Got it.
Most of those guys, of course, were gone. Horace Silver, though, when we did Song for My Father, we sent that. I think, as I recall, we did this through his son. Horace was not going to be around too much longer, wasn't feeling great. I think he was living with his son. And he didn't play the record because the son or wherever he was, they didn't have a turntable. But he, see, I'm going to get emotional telling the story, but he opened it up and, felt it, and looked at the pictures and he just started crying, because he couldn't believe this had happened or that someone thought, this music warranted this kind of presentation. And so that's the only time I'm leaving out some stuff, which it doesn't matter, but he was very moved. But it wasn't because he played the record, because I don't think he had a way to, at that point, I don't think they were able to do that.
But tell him about Ron Carter.
Oh, yeah. Well, Ron Carter, so Don has the relationship with Ron Carter, but Ron made it very clear when we were doing Tone Poets that he wanted them. And especially anything he was on, but he basically wanted them. So Don arranged to get a bunch to Ron Carter. Another thing, Kevin, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but Charlie Watts, of course, Don was producing the Stones. Mm-hmm. And when Charlie was still around, Don sent him a complete set of Tone Poets for his birthday.
Awesome, because I know he was a jazz nut.
one of his last birthdays. I think he lived for another year or two after that. But yeah,
That's special.
Yeah, it is.
Aside from the artist's personal connection to that time in their life, just as a listener, just a casual fan of jazz, the object and the presentation of Music Matters. Kevin, I was telling this earlier before we started recording that you set the bar, the full presentation, Kevin's mastering, the packaging, the pressing, the plating quality, everything was, you set the standard to what now has followed in this big vinyl boom in the last 5 or 6 years. And
Are you saying people are copying us?
You mean like me with my
Oh,
yeah. Yes.
they
are.
But it's just so this record is such a beautiful relic and such an art object that, aside from this, the music being wonderful, that it's this piece that someone can have the rest of their lives and pass on. It's quite special.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Well, setting the bar is great because I think we all get a better product in the end. But you look at what Chad is doing now, Intervention Records, ORG, they all kind of copied that style. And I mean, Music Matters was really kind of the start of it all. But you mentioned Mosaic, and I didn't think about it. Did Michael Kuskuna have any influence on the packaging or the design?
No, no, but he had a lot to do with our getting the deal at that time with EMI, and of course we had the arrangement with him for the photos.
So can you talk to what was the driver behind the design? Who came up with that? I mean, because it's fantastic. I love seeing the session photos.
We had a lot of different layouts that we were looking at, and we kept coming back to this one, which is the one so well. I look the other day. I was went back and found some of the original designs. Some of them were, you just laugh now. It's like, photos, one here, one here, trying to be arty, but it's all messed up, in my opinion. But no, we went to that. And when Don approached me to do something similar for them, he made it pretty clear that he'd made it clear for a long time in other videos that he really loved the Music Matters reissues. I mean, there were signs everywhere. I mean, when you went into Capitol Tower, they didn't have theirs up because they were doing the 75th at that time.
Michael needs to go full screen there because he's showing.
Michael.
There you go.
Yeah.
Which you were ruthlessly consistent with, which I feel like is such a beautiful thing that followed through into this new age. Always with one big one on the inner left, and then the set here on the right of the other players.
Must be a Grant Green record. Matador, killer. Yeah.
That kind of leads us into questioning the titles that were you recreated or you created originally. Like Matador, Gooden's Corner, I believe is another one. Maybe I believe there was a Tina Brooks one, maybe, that you created these new covers for.
Lee Morgan.
Lee Morgan.
Tomcat. And we do it all the time with Tone Poets as well.
So are you having to get clearance? How does it work with the license of the?
You mean now or then?
Maybe in the Music Matters days.
In the Music Matters days, it was all by license. And with Tone Poet, it's not licensing because we are Blue Note. So I work for Blue Note, so it's not. There's no licensing to do. But yeah, we would get licenses for both the photos through Michael and the right to release the music through EMI and later Universal.
I think what Michael's asking here, Joe, is you probably had to get special permission from UME or whatever to do a new jacket for an album that didn't have a really nice jacket, like the Japanese issues and so forth.
Yeah. It wasn't a big hassle at the time because the only jackets, a lot of those had come out in what were known as the LT series, which were these attempts at doing sort of arty jackets in 1980 that I have a bunch. I could pull them out, but they're the white ones that have artwork, a painting or something, or a photo actually. And, I talked to Cascuna about it because that was his program. He's so glad we're changing it. But at the time he did those, ECM had just come on the scene and they were doing these very arty jackets, and they do to this day. And so it was his attempt to do something along those lines. But he's very happy that we've moved, that we're changing and making appropriate Blue Note style jackets for those.
I have a question for both of you about quantities. The 45s were done as editions of 3,500. The
2,500.
Sorry?
2,500.
500? 3,500 for the 33s and 1,500 for the SRX, right?
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. SRX might have more to do with the number of jackets we had on hand.
Right. And so it was 1,000, just for the record, it was 1,000 for the subscribers, right? Roughly.
Yeah.
And then the rest went to retail, music website, distribution, etc. Were there instances where it was like maybe a less popular title where you did produce less of them, or a more popular title where it pushed into 5,000 plus, or was that never a thing?
Well, no, on the 45s, no, we couldn't do, the limit was 2,500. So
that was the contractual limit.
So it was pretty strict, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was my dumb idea, to be honest. I thought that would be, an upper ceiling, and, maybe we didn't know. Chad had his prestige program at the time, and a lot of those at that time.
A-Jazz.
Huh?
The A-Jazz series.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and he did, I can't remember the number of titles, but a lot of those.
It was 25, and then I think it went to 50, and maybe even more. Might have even wound up at 100. I don't remember. It kept expanding. Yeah.
But those, he did 1,000 in those days. And, sometimes it took 2 or 3 or 4 years to sell them in those days.
Oh, how things.
So I thought 2,500, well, that's, we'll be lucky if we ever, but we can put 2,500 out if we have a real hit. Well, as it turns out, they all, for the most part, sold 2,500. And so, I was like, damn, I should have said 5,000, but we just didn't know. We didn't know. So yeah, it was just 2,500. That's all we, if we said 2,500 and we didn't go, well, let's do 26 and sell an extra 100. We didn't do that. It was 25.
Were you ever sort of, because back then you were doing roughly the same as the Tone Poets now, or less? It was a little less.
Oh, Tone Poets now?
Now you're doing 24 Tone Poets a year, right?
Oh, 24 titles. Yeah, I thought you meant quantity. 24 a year, and then there can be special, box sets or that sort of thing on top of that.
And Music Matters was 10 to 20 a year, or some years more?
Let me look at my.
I guess what I'm getting at is because the quantity has increased with the popularity in vinyl over the years.
Yeah.
During the era of, Music Matters 2008 to roughly 2020, let's say, were the discs being hand checked? Was there like more of a human presence than there is now, where they're being, you know, put out in a quantity that's like impossible to verify, or you know, I know it's RTI, but
RTI's
was it
QC is
different
pretty darn
10 years
good.
ago?
Yeah, that didn't really change. It doesn't, you know, I mean, we're on the great presses out there. The QC and attention to detail is the same. You know, those, I can't speak to what they do for other labels. I don't know. For us, they take a lot of care in examining each one. You know, does someone sit there for minutes on end? No. It's, you know, check with a bright light, flip it over and check with a bright light. And it's funny when you're out there, because you'll see them and just toss it into a bin, you know, and you see it a lot. You know, those bins are full of records, and, you know, people are, oh, I take them, you know, but they toss them into a bin, they punch out the center, you know, and those eventually get melted down again. And that doesn't matter if you're pressing 1,000 or 2,500 or 10,000. It's the same process.
Kevin, in the Music Matters days, especially at Acoustech, were you evaluating any of the test pressings, or was that only Joe and Ron doing that?
That was Joe and Ron. I mean, occasionally I'd get a test pressing. I actually got on the list, so I was getting test pressings for a while, but I didn't really get involved in the analysis.
Got it. So
was there any time where you test pressing didn't really pass the quality test and you had to do a recut?
Yeah, when Kevin screwed it up. Not very often. You know, there could be, well, Kevin, you can speak to there can be many reasons. Some of them have nothing to do with.
Not with Kevin. I mean, I'm sure in the plating, some things can get screwed up.
Yeah, plating and pressing. Yeah.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
You know, Joe's real, shall we say, anal retentive about having them on center.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
I'm with you, Joe.
Oh, yeah. Well, I am too. I am kidding him. But yeah, and you know, occasionally you can have non-fill problems, or what they call stitching, and you know, all these things happen on pressings. They just do, and things in the press have to be reset. They have to change the cycle slightly, or the temperature slightly, or whatever, to make everything work. That's the other funny thing about test pressing, selling for thousands of dollars on eBay. You don't know if that's an accepted or rejected test pressing.
Right.
That's always made me laugh. It's like, gee, maybe I just single-handedly dropped the price of test pressings on eBay. We'll see.
Well, Hobson has been going crazy with the Classic Records test press. He has a couple of eBay sites where he's just been offloading them. And you're right. You don't know if it was one that passed or one that failed.
Exactly.
I mean,
and the price is the same.
Yeah.
You know, with Blue Note, I mean, we would never sell a test pressing that was rejected. It doesn't even compute to me that would happen. I can't speak for what anyone else does, but we wouldn't do that.
Has that ever happened with a specific title where you get all the way to that stage and you don't release something?
And we don't release it?
Yeah.
No, you would do a recut. No.
You've always troubleshooted, yeah. I wasn't sure if it was like, you know, I don't know,
something that was uncuttable or something.
I don't know.
No. So Joe, I'm curious. I don't know how well this is going to come out on Zoom. So this is one of the test pressings, and I see the Plastilite.
Yeah.
Were all your test pressings done with the Plastilite label? That's pretty cool.
Yes. And you know, that was, of course, that's an RTI test pressing, but you know, being the crazy kids that we are, we thought, you know, we would do a replica of the Blue Note test pressings, which looked like that because they were pressed at the Plastilite company.
Yeah, I like the
sort of a
homage to
shout out
the
or a
old
tribute.
Plastilite company.
Yep. For a while, if you look carefully at the dead wax, we had Kevin scribe in a P.
Yep.
Or the
The
P
ear.
Yeah.
I know there's different slight maybe ideas you had that didn't fully come to fruition. One of the things that I am curious about, I was looking at eBay the other day and saw a Sonny Clark Leapin' and Lopin' on blue vinyl, which I wasn't aware that was. I don't know if that came into full production, but there are certain titles I know. There's blue variants. Speak No Evil.
True Blue, I think we did those were very small runs, but True Blue and, as you say, Leapin' and Lopin'.
Midnight Blue.
Yeah.
Are there any others that you experimented with color-wise, or even moving into the SRX? That I know there's rumors of Indestructible that was done at SRX, that there's only a handful that were made that didn't go into a full production. Is that correct?
I don't remember. A lot of times on the SRXs, the number that made it onto the market had a lot to do with how many jackets we had left.
Oh, I see. So there wasn't a strict adherence to a specific quantity on those, really. Got it.
And you were Joe, sorry, you were still at Music Matters. Did it overlap with you beginning Blue Note, like with Wayne Shorter, etc.? Were you still working on SRX titles? Like, talk about that transition.
No, at that point, no, I was, there was no overlap. And the SRXs, that was using the same mastering and the same stampers and all that. It's just a different formulation. So there wasn't anything for me to do. The art had already been created. It was simply using a different formulation. So
wasn't there about a 2 or 3 year gap in between Music Matters and Tone Poet?
Yeah. There was definitely, things that pretty much wound down. I mean, the last years of Music Matters were basically just doing some SRX titles, titles we'd already done before.
Was there a gap between the end of the 33 standard edition and the SRX series in time?
I don't remember.
I'm just trying to get it sorted out for the nerds out there watching. There was rumors maybe floating around the internet of Music Matters delving outside of Blue Note for possible titles or runs. Is that anything either of you know about?
Well, we did inquire. In fact, I think they approached us about getting involved with Impulse titles. But, as we looked into it, we ran into the same issue of, how have these things been stored? Where have they been stored? And when you get to that group of labels, they're not in the same place as Blue Note at all. And you guys have probably heard about the infamous fire, on the lot, and some were stored there, unfortunately. And so as we learned that some of those masters didn't exist, we just thought, hell with it. We don't want to get into, because we'd never had to deal with that before. We live in a world where the same messenger comes, and all he has to do is drive from Iron Mountain in Hollywood to Kevin's place, or in the old days, drive from Iron Mountain to RTI, and you get the master. So getting into a situation,
we got kind of spoiled.
Very much. So yeah, when I started to inquire about various titles, and you'd hear not available, and I'd say, well, why is it not available? We don't have it. They didn't want to get, fire was not a word that anyone wanted to use.
Right.
It was later that we learned why they weren't available. And so anyway, long way of saying we passed on that.
So, Kevin, I'm curious because you were doing work for Chad at the time, but the Japanese also approached you about their original master tape series, and you were doing these at the same time. So you're doing Blue Notes for 3 different companies.
The Disc Union series.
Yeah, I think these were coming from Disc Union.
Yeah.
So you really became Mr. Blue Note, and
yeah.
So do you think Music Matters was really kind of the driver for it all, and the Japanese hearing some of those and thinking, hey, we got to get some skin in the game too?
I would have to say yes.
Interesting. And that kind of moves into another question I had, going back to, you're doing the stuff, the Blue Notes for Chad, you're doing the Disc Union stuff, you're doing all the Music Matters stuff. Now the Tone Poets and the Blue Note Classics, you're doing these same titles over and over and over again, seemingly. There's some titles that, Sidewinder, I know you're a Lee Morgan fan. When you're cutting, you've done that now, what, 5 or 6 times?
Probably. I've lost count.
From those, especially Joe, you've been in there with him cutting these for the different series. Is there any change? Are you using the same metal parts? Are you even recutting it completely?
Oh yeah, they're all being recut. Joe and I never ever go back to my previous notes. We always listen to each title fresh. Occasionally, I will go back to my old notes, mostly just to get an idea for levels. If I'm cutting a 22-minute side or whatever. But I rarely use that as a Bible, for this is the way I cut it before, so this is the way I'm cutting it now. Yeah.
So there could be very subtle variation.
There's variations. Now, if I've cut something in the last 3 years, 2 or 3 times, that's probably going to be the same each time. I'm just talking about something that I did in 2004 or 2012, versus to now, I wouldn't necessarily.
And it's a different system. Your system has changed since
That's
then.
true. That's true.
I think it'd make for a really fun A/B session to take the 5 or 6 times you've done Sidewinder and compare them all.
I'll leave that to you.
I've done that.
and I would trust what you'd come up with, Paul.
Yeah.
You're very thorough in your analysis.
I may have to try that out sometime.
Well, Kevin, I mean, you can. I don't know if you want to get into this or not, but the Disc
Malt Scotch. Oh,
the Disc Unions are different in other ways too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's a fundamental thing that is different.
Can you explain what's different there?
Well,
you may not have to, but
I kept it under wraps, but it has come out since that they were cut from very high res digital, 2492. And they were, I think there was talk that it was from CD. No, it wasn't from TV. There was talk that it was the RVGs. No, it wasn't the RVGs. I think most of them are flat transfers of the mono master, because that whole series was mono. So it's either a flat transfer of the mono master or a flat transfer of the stereo combined to mono. And that's what they did, because that's what they want to mess with.
They took those from the tapes they had, right?
Yes. Right. So it wouldn't, when I say master tape, I guess I should say the Japanese master.
So we're getting into another MoFi type situation here.
Well, yeah. I mean, that was kind of before everybody was worried about the whole analog versus digital thing so much, I think.
Yeah. Well, regardless, so it was funny because I was talking to Ron about this one probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And, I was begging him. I'm like, I want a Music Matters of this one. And Ron said, no, I'm not going to do that one because you could hear the PA in the background. So at least that's what he told me.
Okay.
He wasn't a fan of the sound of it. And maybe it's related to, the photos, not being able to get some of the photos from the time and having the complete package. Do you recall?
No.
Okay.
My memory gets really fuzzy on stuff that far back.
Blakey Live is, Kevin and I talk about this all the time. The tapes that Rudy was recording with, I mean, you have to admire what he did, because he's working with tape formulations that have very little headroom compared to what we have now. So think about it. He's in a live gig with Art Blakey, and
Mr. Basher.
Art and Rudy fought like cats and dogs for years. You know, Rudy would say, "Don't play so loud," and Art would go back up there and just beat the shit out of his drums. You know, in response, he'd be, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna play louder." And so what would happen is you get, overload. You know, the tape. Rudy didn't like tape hiss, and so he cut hot. He always did. So you don't hear much hiss on his records,
Right.
but you do hear occasional overload of this or that, because he's walking it right up to the edge. And then you get
I don't have the Bohemia 1 and 2 of Blakey that you guys did on Music Matters. Is that present on there, or does it sound more like a studio recording in terms of like the lack? Like, is there a lack of hiss, or does it feel like a?
So my opinion, Cafe Bohemia sounds better than Night at Birdland. Maybe this is just speculation on my part, but maybe Rudy took some lessons learned from A Night at Birdland. I don't know.
I mean, we hear it. People will nitpick the record sometimes in the sonics, but Kevin and I hear if you really want to, put a microscope on Rudy's recordings, we could put up just about anything and say, "Yep, right there. Do you hear that? Little bit of, and you can hear Rudy going for the fader because somebody came in hot." And again, these are live 2-track. There's no mix. You're mixing as it's going. So, you'll.
Why didn't we fix that in the mix? We hear that a lot.
Yeah, there is no. But yeah, you can hear Rudy going, "Oh shit," and pulling the fader down. And so for that moment that whatever happened, Lee came in too hot on the mic or whatever, Art bashed the cymbal.
I love that. I love that.
We've come to just accept it. It's
what happened that day.
I mean, that's his craft. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's what I meant more is like when it's a, quiet studio session at Rudy's versus a Bohemia, for instance. I guess because I just don't have a reference point. I don't have those. I've obviously heard them digitally, but I've never heard the Music Matters. I wondered if it was similar to a studio.
I got to correct you though. I don't think there were any quiet sessions at Rudy's. Those cats were playing, man.
You heard Free for All lately?
Yeah, Free for All. Yeah, that's a really dynamic record.
Amazing.
Yeah, and
escalation going on back in the day.
Yeah, one of my personal favorites of all time is this one.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and the title track, I'm sure, must have been challenging for Rudy.
Yep. But that's a standard, I mean,
yeah.
I think that's as typical of the Blue Note sound as any record,
Going into Music Matters and the full run, distinct titles. Do you know the number that you did? Jeremy and I have both tried to figure it out. Distinct titles, I mean, it could be done in 45, 33, and SRX, but distinct titles somewhere in the 130 range. Does that sound right? Do we know?
I thought it was closer to like 180 or something. Am I wrong?
I would have to take a look at that. It's
that could be right.
More like I'm going to say 150, but I'd have to go back and look at the lists and figure it out.
Got it. One white whale in that whole series is the Duke Pearson Wahoo album, which Jeremy and I have about half of the run of the Music Matters. Paul has every single one, including Wahoo. But
yeah, it's a great record.
This is one that we hope comes back into a reissue series at some point. I don't know if that's in the cards, but it wouldn't be in the Tone Poet series, but it could very well end up in classic. He's got Jem, who's dear friend and co-worker at Blue Note.
He's got, I sent him a list of everything we ever did. And so, he draws from that pretty extensively. And what I would say is if it hasn't come out yet, just be patient.
Was Wahoo, were there less made of certain titles like Wahoo, for instance? Because we've noticed how there just seems to be a lot less availability of certain titles. Especially, was it Wahoo, The Happenings, Bobby Hutcherson? There's a few where they're just sort of impossible to actually get a copy. Do you know
where some are?
Can you repeat that, Joe? Sorry, I missed it.
I said, I know where some are. Yeah, there'll be, you'll see something coming up here. There's a significant number. And you'll start to see some. I mean, they were what were made at the time, but they're basically, it was my allotment.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Off camera, please. You'll tell us.
Off camera.
Okay. I will.
And Joe, so my memory is kind of poor, but I became a subscriber, I think the first year. But when did you know you really had a hit with Music Matters? Because I think as the years went along, I think the momentum really started to build. And, I started to talk about it on YouTube when I first started my channel years ago, but I started to promote it to other guys. And I had a bunch of people that were trying to pull old titles, and it just became impossible to find them. But when did you really know that, hey, things are really working with a label?
It took a couple of years and a lot of word of mouth, all this YouTube phenomenon of, all you guys commenting on records that wasn't really in play at that, or there's probably somebody doing it, but it wasn't like it is now. And then, we noticed at a certain point that they'd all go, and they'd all sell, and it didn't matter. It's like tone poets, they all sell about the same. It's not like, there's a dog title that just doesn't move. It can land in distribution in different ways, but from the standpoint of the label, they're gone, so, it doesn't mean the store down the street might not have some, we never know. But no, they started to all sell. And that's when I felt like an idiot, because I'd said the number 2,500 thinking, oh, that's so many records. That's
yeah.
And I was like, God, what an idiot,
Well, I would say, like, after the first 2 or 3 years, that's really when the vinyl resurgence started to kick in.
Right.
And honestly, I mean, I really didn't get back into vinyl until 2010, and Music Matters was one of the first few that I managed to pick up. And I think I saw them advertised through Acoustic Sounds, and then I got hooked, and I got on the subscription list. So yeah, I think you guys really got caught in that boom when vinyl really started to pick back up. And now I can just see the Tone Poets easily selling out in their first runs. Because what is it? The Chet Baker, you've had to repress 2 or 3 times now.
It's astonishing.
Yeah,
it's astonishing. I mean,
Joe, if I'm right, if you had done a license for 5,000, you would be committed to pressing and selling, well, at least paying for 5,000, right? It's not like you could have had a license for 5,000 and only pressed 2,500.
So, the way the licenses for us worked is that there would be a minimum, and it wouldn't always be the full 2,500, but it would be maybe you'd have to pay for half up front.
Okay.
And but still, there was a commitment.
Chunk of change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ron made the comment to me that, getting insurance to get the tapes out was also a major factor.
Yep.
I'm
which
still
you don't have
paying
to
for
deal
that.
with now.
Yeah, Kevin deals with that.
That's on me now. Yeah.
Oh, it's on you, Kevin. Well, of course, you got to take care of the tapes, but
Well,
yeah.
it doesn't just cover the Blue Note tapes. It covers all. It's a rider in my insurance policy for the business.
Ah, okay.
And so, do you have the same courier bringing these tapes to your studio, Kevin, and all these?
Two different couriers every time. A woman and a man that both work for Iron Mountain, I believe, or maybe they're UME employees. I don't know, but
No, Iron Mountain.
Same two every time.
So do you know ahead of time what you're cutting that day?
Oh yeah, and we know exactly when they're arriving. You know, there's a guy named Jack Arenas over there that we deal with, who's really, really good, and he's put together some things for us that we probably would not have been able to do without his help. So and so yeah, he you know, a lot of communication and right on it.
Do they bake those tapes when needed at their own discretion?
I do. I do the baking if it needs to be done. Back under Capitol, and maybe when the tapes were still at the tower, they baked them, but I don't think they have that capability there at Iron Mountain.
And Kevin, we talked about this before, but there was a certain year where the Scotch formulation changed, and you're having to bake those tapes more than in previous years. Is it's correct?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't apply to the Blue Note stuff so much, but yeah, actually it was Ampex tape that the formulation changed around 1974, and so tapes have to be baked after 74. You know, that are Ampex.
So, of these 150-ish Music Matters titles, do either of you have these in your own collections as like an archive of that series?
I do.
Yeah. I mean, if Kevin got a copy of every album he cut, he'd have to have his own.
I'd have to have 3 more houses.
Yeah.
Kevin, I'm going to make your problem worse next time I see you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
I like the sound of being able to say it.
Awesome.
Do either of you two have maybe a couple titles in the front of your mind from the Music Matters series that just completely bowled you over, that you're maybe that you loved already, but they made you fall deeper in love by hearing the full expanse of the frequency spectrum from the original tape?
Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one. Joe?
I'm always, that first time we went in, so Horace Parlin, Speaking My Piece,
The big piece.
because we went in with one idea, and that idea went out the window 5 minutes after Kevin put the tape up. It was such a eureka moment, and everything changed. So that one's special. There's a bunch, those records with Donald Byrd and Pepper Adams, Catwalk, and oh God, there's
Royal
happening.
Lee Morgan, Sidewinder, I guess, for me, and Tomcat. Those two were just two of my favorites.
Cape Verdean Blues. I'm looking.
Yeah, that's
a great one.
Yeah, that's my second favorite Horace title after Song for My Father. I talked these guys into doing Song for My Father.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you did. I love that record.
Me too.
And Joe, I loved your story because really I didn't really get back into, or really didn't get into Blue Note until about 2009. And one of the first artists that I delved into was Horace Silver. And Horace was still alive at the time, and he had his own website, and he was doing signings of things. And I sent an email, and I wanted to get one of his signed autobiography. And his son wrote back to me and said, "Hey, Dad's not doing so well, but he thanks you." And his son did manage to send me a signed CD, but just getting your backstory was wonderful, because I'm happy to hear that Horace did get to see and feel one of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was a very special day.
What's that song? It's like in my top 10 jazz standard. Pretty Eyes? Is that Cape Verdean?
Cape Verdean? Yeah, Cape Verdean Blues.
The song. I think it's called Pretty Eyes. I just love that song.
Happy to look. That's on the turntable.
Yeah,
Pretty eyes, yeah.
we all got, yeah.
Man, that is a great record. I haven't got mine in front of me, but I've got it.
I don't have mine either.
My records are all in the other room. Anyway.
Amazing. So what is, if you can speak to this, we've noticed Music Matters website is still around, obviously. There are a handful of titles that are still there and for sale. What's the current state of that? Do you have any connection with what's going on right now? Are you fully out of it, Joe? And
I mean, I talk to Ron every month. Yeah, as far as I mean, Blue Note isn't really licensing to anybody anymore because we've got 3 series going now, and so there's no we're not licensing to anybody, and I'm usually the guy that has to explain why not when people try.
So the Mobile Fidelity something else was done like years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
The deal was done a while back, and but there'll just be that one. You won't see more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course I did that for the classic series too.
Yep.
Right.
So sorry, Joe, you were saying?
That will be the only one, because they sat on that for a long time, but that's a one-off.
Which sounds common for MoFi. They'll announce something and then sit on it for years. But yeah, we were all kind of curious if MoFi was trying to get a licensing deal to do the 45s.
No.
Nope.
No, it's just a one-time thing.
Got it.
And so in terms of the current stock and the current state of the Music Matters site, I mean, there's even more. Michael and I noticed there's more titles that went up, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago. So those, what is the current sort of operation there? It's really just Ron?
Ron and his wife.
Got it. So once that stock's gone, it's kind of finito. Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Get them while you can.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta grab them while they're there, because they are, those are wonderful sounding albums, and I mean it's really what brought me into the whole jazz fold. I mean, I owe a lot to the Music Matters label, because if it wasn't for it, I don't think I would have delved into the Blue Note, and I wouldn't have gotten into jazz as much as I've gotten into today.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's great to see.
Yeah. So we're about at the end of our time here, but I just wanted to, ask you guys in summary. I mean, what are your takeaways from those years? Kevin, I mean, can you talk about, some of the, sum it up those years with a label?
It was all good. It was all great. I mean, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I was honored to be able to work on those titles. That was my major exposure to Blue Note. I mean, I had a few, mostly CDs and a couple OGs, but as I mentioned before we went live, Lee Morgan was a big discovery for me. I wasn't really familiar with his music, and now he's one of my favorite trumpeters. So yeah, it was a thrill to do that stuff.
People ask, do you get, does it get old, or does it? Kevin can tell you, like, I get excited every single time we're going to be working together in a week and a half.
Yeah.
We do in a few days, and I get excited every time, and those tapes go up, and it never gets old. It's always like, oh man, listen to that.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
And then you get excited about capturing it, and I'll tell you, when I get a test pressing, it's usually the last time I play my OG, because at this point, I was so used to hearing what the compromises that had to be made during the 50s and 60s when these OGs came out, that the tape spoils you. It's like, that's what I want to hear. I want to hear that. And so the closest I can get to that is when the test comes in. And then when production comes in, that's really exciting, because the jacket and photos and all that. But there are people that they don't want to hear about that. It's like, oh, no, man, I want what came out, what Rudy cut, the way he cut it, that's what I want. I always say that's great too.
Yeah.
Happy hunting. It's if that's what winds your watch, absolutely.
Yeah, like you said, there's no right or wrong. It's just
no right
you
or
get
wrong.
a certain nostalgia for a certain sound.
Yep.
And I can attest to that. But
Sure.
for me, I do have some OGs, but really it's Music Matters and Tone Poets. That's all I really listen to.
You want some OGs? I've got like hundreds, probably, God, I don't even know, but lots and lots and lots.
I think a lot of people that criticize, modern reissues like Music Matters, Tone Poets, a lot of people haven't even heard one. They're just stuck with the OGs, and they might have never even gotten the chance to listen to one on a great system and have that reference point, I think,
I think you're probably right.
And there's some psychological aspects to it too. If you chase the OG for years and years before all this other stuff happened, and you probably paid a fair amount to get it, you don't really want somebody messing up your party, saying, nah, you really want this one for $38. That one you spent $500 to get. Believe me, I get it. I understand.
Yeah, $500 for a good scratched up record, which I don't get.
But it's like, that was the original thing that, there is a historical.
Right.
My wife is always saying, you never play the OGs again. Why don't you sell them? And I can't bring myself to do it yet. It's weird. It's weird. I don't play them, but I'm not ready to let them go either. I can't explain it.
I can respect that, because I think I have 9 different copies of something else and 8 different versions of Moanin'. And my wife will look at me and say, why do you need all the copies of the same record? I'm like, well, they're different.
Why do you need all those shoes?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you both for what you've done over your careers. It's going to outlive us all. So we're just grateful for the work and the passion that you poured into this. And there's nothing better in life, in my mind, than listening to music and it making you feel more alive and it enhancing just your outlook on things and the way you feel. And like, there's nothing else that powerful in the world that I've found. So thank you all.
Same.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I personally, I owe you both. So like I said, if it wasn't for Music Matters Jazz, I would not have delved into Blue Note or any other jazz title as much as I did.
That's fun.
That was labor of love, to put it mildly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thanks for asking us.